Rudyard Griffiths here, the publisher of The Hub. Welcome to this, our continuing series, Trump's trade war. We're on day 39, and we have a fascinating new poll to show you about Canadians' reactions to the Trump threat. And to break it all down for us, pleasure to welcome onto the program Sachi Kurl. She's the president of the Angus Reid Institute, a fantastic polling outfit that we go to regularly. Sachi, great to be in conversation with you.
Thanks, Richard. Nice to see you.
Really neat poll. I jumped on it this morning and reached out to you, so glad you could come on the program. So let's walk through a couple of the numbers here for our listeners and then dig into them. You tracked from January 25th to March 25th a supposed kind of referendum question, hypothetical.
Sorry, just to correct you, that is tracking between January of 2025 and March 2025, not it wasn't a 2-month fielding window. I'm sorry just in case it leaves that. Yeah.
Okay, we got it. Let's get that graphic back up here and we'll break it down. So very little change here in terms of it's fixed, I guess, is your feeling as a pollster when you see 90-10. Basically, this boat has sailed, at least in terms of the aggregate national numbers. Big opposition here, solid opposition, Canada not joining the U.S.
And opposition that largely, with a few exceptions that I'm sure we'll talk about, but largely captures most demographics, most people across the political spectrum, most people across the economic, regional, demographic spectrum. So when you've got 9 in 10 people agreeing on something, Richard, as you know and as I know, it means that basically you've got majorities across almost every walk of life, again, with some exceptions, that are saying, no, thank you, we don't want to be the 51st state of the United States.
Now, what I love about you guys is you think up devilish questions that really bring out, some interesting findings for us to ponder. So let's go to this next graph. Now you're showing if there was a referendum in Canada and Canadians were to vote on becoming part of the U.S., how would you vote? You looked at conservative voters here in Canada, and you looked at them in terms of 2 hypothetical outcomes, currently supporting the Conservative Party. The number doubles from 10 to 21%, becoming part of the U.S. And then look at this, Sachi. It trebles. 33% of conservative voters say that if the Liberals win a majority in the next election, they are out of here.
Yeah, and you use the word devilish. It is kind of a cheeky question, but I think it reveals a little bit of what's been going on domestically with political messaging and political polling out of the various party leaders. Of course, Doug Ford has fully wrapped himself in elbows up Captain Canada and has been one of the strongest voices. Outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has also said, hell no, we're going to fight and punch you back if you punch us. We've started to hear that messaging from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, but I would suggest that in the first weeks of this conflict, particularly around the rhetoric of the 51st state, he was a little bit quieter on that front and a little bit less, or a lot less, depending on how you look at it, likely to really push back and say, oh no, there's no way, Trump, Donald, you've got your stupid ideas, the way we heard from other politicians sort of really pushing that kind of rhetoric. And of course, people keep asking me, Sachi, what's going on with that? Sachi, why do you think that is? And those data right there, Rudyard, really tell us that Poilievre is sort of trying to walk a tightrope here, or he's painted into a bit of a corner in that it's not the majority of conservative voters who support joining the 51st state. In fact, the majority oppose it. But there is a significant and influential segment of the party that says right off the bat, unprompted, 1 in 5 say, yeah, sure, we could join the 51st. We could join United States and become 51st state. And then for an even greater number, a third of them, the prospect of another Liberal government says to them, oh yeah, that would prompt me to want to go and join up with the Americans. So, that is a significant part of why we're not seeing Pierre Poilievre perhaps as firebrandy in his political communication on this particular issue.
Well, let's go to another interesting finding and bring some more demographics into this. In this case, age. So if we'll get that graph up on the screen, we're showing that 35% men 35 to 54, 22% support joining the United States. That number, Sachi, when I looked at the crosstabs that you helpfully provided on the Institute's website, that number doubles for men in Western Canada. It almost approaches 50% in a couple of provinces. What the heck is up with men, especially men in Western Canada, when it comes to this all-important question, are we going to be the 51st state or not?
You want to know what's up with men? You tell me. You fit that demographic, as I believe. So maybe you've got some unique insight into that. What I can tell you is where we see a level of correlation between men, Western Canadian voters, and the Conservative vote, particularly concentrated. And I want to be really clear, when we're talking about Western Canadian voters, we're talking about those particularly in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, not as much and not to the same extent in British Columbia or in Manitoba. And I know sort of when we think Ontario West, all of those four provinces get lumped together. But what we're really talking about here is Alberta and Saskatchewan. And, what can I say? That is consistently one of the strongest holds for conservative-leaning political parties, whether it's the Saskatchewan Party, whether it's the UCP, respectively in Alberta, and the Saskatchewan Party in Saskatchewan, or the federal Conservatives. Where do they do supremely well? They do very, very well in Alberta and Saskatchewan. They do very well, much better with men than they do with women, particularly younger men and middle-aged men relative to older men over the age of 55 who, call it life experience or whatever it is, tend to be a little bit more centrist in their views of the world.
Mm. Look, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question so you don't have to answer it. But the question is the following. If you put together some of these crosstabs, men in Western Canada, the fact that all the Western provinces have basically 3 times the support for separation from Canada versus Ontario and Quebec, do we see the beginnings here, the seeds of, in a sense, a Western separatist movement if indeed the Liberals win the next election and we have that explosion of Western alienation? That's what I take away from these results, Sachi. I see the beginnings here, the tea leaves reading that if the Liberals return to power, we are going to have to reckon with an eruption from the West that is both geographic but then concentrated, again, within this demographic of men, 35 to 50 plus, who are a key part of the Conservative Party and clearly are reluctant, resisting the idea of a future unified Canada with Liberal majority rule.
Right. So again, let's just underscore that when we're talking about that Western alienation, we're talking about Alberta and Saskatchewan alienation. And, it's no secret that in those provinces you see candidates running from like independence parties and maverick parties and fringe parties tend to do a little bit better there. The vote is less split between the Conservatives, the federal Liberals, and the federal NDP as it is between the Conservatives, maybe a little bit of the PPC and a little bit of some of those independent parties. There is an element of the population that does feel increasingly disenfranchised in those two provinces specifically. But but again, to your point, when you layer that across with demographics, I think back to when was the last time we saw some of these cleavages? We saw it around the second year of the pandemic, where lockdown politics and vaccine politics really started to come to the forefront. And who were the folks who were least institutionally minded around vaccinations, around staying home, around all of those rules? Where did you see the greatest pockets of pushback? It was among men in middle-aged men and younger men in places like Alberta, Saskatchewan, but also in Quebec, also in Ontario. So is it so much regionally driven, or is it just something about the political culture in that demographic, combined with regional disaffection or alienation, which, you know, even when we had a prime minister from the riding of Calgary, right? Stephen
Mm-hmm.
Harper, towards the end of his 10-year term, Rudyard, he was seen as a central Canadian, Toronto, Ontario focused prime minister and not a Western prime minister, which was sort of the sentiment in the early terms that he had. So, you know, the notion that the West has been again, the notion that Alberta and Saskatchewan are being overlooked, particularly around resource development, over the lack of pipeline infrastructure and not getting things built and not really exploiting economically the resources that those provinces have. It has long been, since before you or I were born, going back to, you know, Pierre Trudeau
Mm-hmm.
and the National Energy Project and Just Watch Me and all of those things, price controls, all of it. It's long standing, it's long simmering, it's long resented, and here's just the latest iteration of it, if you will. I'll leave you with this one point, which is, I think that when you prompt a question, hey, do you want to join the states? Should we join the states? People might go, yeah, I think we should. Does You talked about that separatist movement? Does that mean that that's the first thing that's motivating them when they get up in the morning? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Well, Sachi Curl from the Angus Reid Institute, a fascinating poll. Thank you for coming on our program today to break it all down for Hub listeners. You can see the analysis. We'll be featuring this video along with some analysis of the poll later today in the Hub. Get that in the coming hours at www.thehub.ca. Sachi, thanks for this. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for the time.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.